So, this is lecture number 6 for Introduction to Literature and the Environment. I have us at the course website because I always want you to remember that you can, if you like, return to the navigable lectures at any time in this material. So, we are, with lecture 6, between the Greek and Roman periods on our timeline here. The reason for that is the formal introduction, arguably, of pastoral begins with the Greek poet Theocritus, but it's picked up and popularized in a major way by Virgil and other Roman writers. So in a way, it's situated between Greek and Roman cultures, and I think it's safe to say it's a Greco-Roman form. So let's pull back a little bit and look at the lecture in its entirety here. So a couple things to note about pastoral at the onset. First, that it's enormously popular as an art form. In fact, before you started this course, you may well have thought that most of what we would be doing would essentially be pastoral literature, even if you weren't familiar with the art form. What I mean by that is pastoral is often preoccupied with over-the-top romanticized accounts of nature, scenes of, perfect harmony between human beings and nature, things like depictions of roses and all that. That's what people think of often when they think of literature and the environment. But as we've seen in this course, that's really not what we're focusing on. And furthermore, we'd like to understand why that preoccupation begins today, why that is nature writing for so many people. Pastoral is part of that. So let's jump right in here to our first section of the pastoral. So far in this course we haven't looked at very much literature per se. I mean, the Epic of Gilgamesh is, but it's very early literature. The Bible isn't quite literature per se. Hesiod, not in the sense that we're used to thinking of it. But now we're getting into more literature. And from the onset we should note that pastoral is not a literary genre. By genre, of course, I just mean like a category. So genres would be like plays, novels, poems, etc. But the thing about pastoral, and it is best to think of it, I think, as a mode of writing, is that it can be any number of genres. Hence, you can have a pastoral play. We'll read one if you haven't read it already, as you like it. Pastoral elegies, Milton's Lycidas is one of the most famous, and so forth. Walden is in some sense a pastoral work. If you think about pastoral this way, as sort of able to move across genres, you can understand why it's so pervasive. So you can just have any work, any sort of work you like can be a pastoral work. Moreover, not all works have to be basically with a pastoral focus. So you can have a work that just touches on pastoral a little bit, even though it's not preoccupied with it. In that sense, you can just have an enormous range of literary works that are pastoral. But pastoral doesn't have to be a work of literature at all. In fact, you can have pastoral paintings, you can have pastoral sculpture, pastoral architecture, even something like pastoral music. So the idea here is that even though it sort of officially begins with Theocritus and Virgil as a literary form, pastoral now has spread out to inhabit not only a range of literary genres, but a range of other works as well. So I am going to now play for you piece of pastoral music. This is Beethoven's Symphony No. 6, which quite appropriately is titled Pastoral. And the idea here is that Beethoven is trying to, through music, have us imagine a beautiful pastoral scene. So okay, sorry for the technical problems. For some reason, it doesn't like to play the MP3s on my computer as well as it should. Now, hopefully it'll do better on yours. But hopefully you get the basic idea here, that pastoral is this way of imagining a beautiful scene. It's very fluid, very soft, very nice. So a couple hundred years after Beethoven, Aaron Copland will write Appalachian Spring, and we'll hear a little bit from that. Copland especially is imagining a pastoral scene, something like rural America. And the idea here in this particular piece is to imagine daybreak in a scene like that. Hopefully you get the idea there. If you get a chance, either of these are great pieces of music. You may already be familiar with Symphony No. 6 because it was made famous in what film? And that would be Disney's Fantasia, where it's not imagined as a pastoral landscape on the ground anyhow, but up in the clouds. Appalachian Spring is also just an absolutely beautiful piece. But it's not just music, it can be visual arts as well. So we'll talk about this piece in a moment. I'll contextualize it, but first I just wanted to show you a typical pastoral scene. Notice that this is pastoral expanding beyond its original context. What I mean by that is the obligatory scene with shepherds and their sheep is not here. Instead, you have cows and a rural scene of America, in this case right before, it's important, the American Civil War. But any scene like this that's just imagined as very beautiful, perfect, idyllic, these are often in the pastoral tradition. Poems also, of course, can be pastoral. This is Sappho. Come to me here from Crete to this holy temple where your lovely apple grove stands and your altars that flicker with incense. And below the apple branches, cold, clear water sounds, everything shadowed by roses and sleep that falls from bright shaking leaves, and a pasture for horse blossoms with flowers of spring, and breezes are flowering like honey. Come to me here. Absolutely, absolutely beautiful poem. But note that this is written in the 7th century before the Christian era, almost 500 years before Theocritus would write. This is important because even though sort of its official inauguration as an art form that has, shepherds and sheep and all that we've come to expect from traditional pastoral, even before that, works like Sappho were doing the same sort of thing. This is a beautiful depiction of a country scene. If you just sort of close your eyes, imagine the clear water sounding, smell the roses, hear the shaking leaves above you, this is, transporting you to a pastoral scene. You can find things like this across cultures, not only in Western culture. You could go back to the myth of Gilgamesh and find scenes like this. All broadly speaking pastoral, all a celebration of rural country life, although it will officially sort of happen with Theocritus. Before moving away from the sort of audio-visual aspects of pastoral, I wanted to leave you with a song that might make Beethoven and Copland come into relief a little, in that this is George Gershwin, from An American in Paris, and he is doing the opposite. He's trying to imagine what it would be like if you walked into a big city and heard the hustle and bustle of the city. Okay, hopefully you get the idea. This is meant to invoke an urban scene, but it's interesting because in the process, sort of vice versa, it also can have you imagining a pastoral scene insofar as when you hear all this hustle and bustle, and it's a little too much to take, you imagine what it would be like separated from all that. And it's often the case that the urban can invoke the pastoral and vice versa, and we'll see this with Edward Burtynsky at the end of this lecture. So, art and literature. Talking about pastoral here, of course. This is an important point not to be forgotten. Pastoral scenes are often literally just that. They're meant to depict sheep and shepherds and a perfect relationship to the planet, in which case they would have a lot of environmental import, obviously. It's also the case, though, that those same scenes may not principally be about shepherds, the environment, or sheep at all, even though that's what's being depicted there. So it's a little tricky because you'll literally see the pastoral scene, you'll think it's about the pasture, the shepherds and their sheep, but it's really not at all. So, This is kind of the consequence of the fact that pastoral literature has been around even before Theocritus with Sappho. So while it can literally be about the environment, it can also be a veiled way about talking about something else. So in that sense, it's not literal, but allegorical. And why would you want to speak allegorically about something else by way of pastoral? Well, pastoral provided for hundreds and hundreds of years a safe way of broaching political, ecclesiastical, i.e., religious and other sensitive issues. So, for most of human the history of literature in the West, anyhow, you could not come out and critique a monarch. It just would be a dangerous thing to do. If you were too strong in doing it, you could be killed. People had their hands cut off, their ears cut off for doing that. So how do you do it if you want to critique something political or religious? One way of doing it is to use the pastoral form, to write about shepherds experiencing hard times. So here's a pastoral scene, everything looks great, and the shepherds are saying, oh, it's so bad, we don't have enough to eat, there's always the problem with war because our country is going to war again and again. And would that be about the environment or shepherds? No. What that's about would be the contemporary political scene where the writer is unhappy with the famines caused by the political policies of the monarch, unhappy that the monarch is waging war after war. How do you do this, without getting in trouble? You write it as a pastoral story. If you get called on it and someone says, well, wait, you're really critiquing our government, this is not going to be allowed, then all you do is say, wait, I'm writing pastoral poetry. This is what people have always done. It has nothing to do with politics. This is about shepherds. And as a consequence, it's a relatively safe and, of course, veiled way of approaching kind of difficult issues. So a famous example would be Edmund Spenser's The Shepherd's Calendar. You may know Spenser more famously for writing the great epic poem The Faerie Queen. 15 or so years before that, he wrote The Shepherd's Calendar. It is a critique, in some ways, of the reign of Queen Elizabeth. In it, the poet talks about a pastoral scene. It seems like it's just about shepherds. At times he actually is very complimentary of Elizabeth. But embedded in that scene, what would seem to be, about the environment is, in fact, quite a bit of political commentary on Spenser's part. But again, literally, it seems to be a shepherd's story. Allegorically, it is a very poignant and powerful religious and political commentary. This is the point. Don't forget. Pastoral can mask subversive and dangerous political writing. Allegorically. Literally, it can be one thing. Allegorically, this can be its central project. So this is where it gets extra tricky. And, we have to sort of come to grips with pastoral in this class. And it would have been great if it were just an environmental form and then we could just talk about it for its environmental import. But, this 3,000 year of history that it has complicates matters. So on the one hand, we have to be able to separate out the allegorical from the literal. And now to make life even a little more complicated, and we'll see this in Lecture 7 with Virgil's first eclogue, that the two can sometimes come together. So the writer can depict a perfect pastoral scene and can talk about the political decisions made by the monarch and how those decisions actually impact the perfect pastoral scene. How would that work? Well, not to give it away with Virgil, but Virgil is talking about how this farmer, Meliboeus, loses his farm because of political decisions. So on the one hand, it's a veiled discussion of politics. In fact, Caesar Augustus is the target for it. But on the other hand, it's about what literally happens to the environment, that a farm is lost and it passes from someone who really would care about it and take care of it, Meliboeus, and someone, this new owner, a soldier, who presumably won't care about it at all. So in that sense, the poem is both political and both literal and allegorical, and a collision of the literal and allegorical as well. It's tricky, but just something to keep in mind as we encounter pastoral repeatedly in this term. This is the thing. So it's best not to make any initial assumptions about a pastoral work. If you do, if you think the Shepherd's Calendar is going to be literally about environmental issues, it's not, and it will confuse you. So because we encounter so much pastoral in this term, be prepared for this, to sort out the allegorical and the literal, and perhaps intersections of the two. Nostalgia and the contemporary. So one of the most conspicuous features of pastoral is that it is highly nostalgic because it imagines that perfect time that human beings once had with the planet. We often will refer to this as sort of pastoral thinking, because the golden age from Hesiod to Virgil also plays into this. We also call it golden age thinking at a time. It's just the notion that there was once a time when life was simpler and better, where human beings were imagined as having a perfect relationship with the planet. Again, Eden, the golden age, and pastoral all propound this view, and it potentially worrisome, even dangerous, as we'll see throughout the term, for environmental thinking, because it positions us in a way that we are predisposed to imagine the solution to our environmental problems not in the future but in the past. And the knee-jerk response is always to go back to a simpler time, to abandon our current practices and go back to this, simpler time. This is a nostalgic view, though. From the very beginning with pastoral, it paints the scene romantically and unrealistically as being perfect, because that's one of the precepts of the project. It is not the case, though, that human beings live that relationship usually. It's rather a very romanticized version of it. So, pastoral is joining the Judeo-Christian tradition of Eden, the Greco-Roman, i.e. Hesiod through Ovid and Virgil tradition of the Golden Age, and pastoral too posits a locus amoenus, where human beings lived at peace with the planet. You can see with these three traditions coming together, and they will by the time we get to the medieval and Renaissance period, that there's just going to be this enormous argument that human beings once had a perfect relationship with the planet. It's coming from these three traditions, so it's hard to ignore it. But one of the things we will do in this course is sort of take that idea apart. So one of the interesting things about pastoral is that unlike Eden and the Golden Age, which are imagined in the past, pastoral can be imagined as still, the pastoral locus amoenus can be imagined as still existing in the rural countryside. So it's not lost to the past, but still here and now. An interesting thought then, interesting to think about, is to go back to Gilgamesh, where we first saw this sort of country-city dyad, this binary structure in opposition, where you talked about either the country or the city. On the myth of Gilgamesh, obviously, the city, in this case literally the city of Uruk, inside those massive walls, was what was privileged. The opening of Gilgamesh is just an over-the-top celebration of what an amazing place that is. Outside is what was worrisome, that was sort of wild, unkept. And one of the major themes of the story is that the wild, allegorically Enkidu, has to be brought in and made part of the city. Whatever is human needs to be brought in. He only becomes fully human when he's there. In any event, the dyad here between country and city is 3,000 years before Hesiod, Theocritus, and Virgil put in place. But culture is good, was outside, country and nature is bad. 2,200 years ago, that gets inverted. Country and the city are still there as a binary structure in opposition, but now the country is increasingly going to be what's good. The city, urban places are increasingly going to be bad. All sorts of problems there, disease, crime, you name it. And not just the city is put in opposition to the country, but the court also. And this is in part because of the allegorical way that pastoral works, because it's a way of critiquing monarchs and all. So nonetheless, you have this binary structure of the perfect country place, a locus dominus, which still exists, not just in the Golden Age or in the lost prelapsarian past. It still exists, and it's so much better than what goes on in the city and the court. Yeah, so it's interesting to note and something to look for. When you see the contemporary world, you can see people looking again and again to a locus dominus and why it's so important, and all eyes sort of look toward. This could be argued, incidentally, at the end of the 20th century, where certain environmentalists, deep ecology would be an example, we're looking to try to find the perfect locus dominus, sort of indigenous people of Australia or South America, where everything was perfect and everything was still fine. Well, why was there such a preoccupation with that? That's because something was really going on in the modern world that was very worrisome, and people were trying to very nostalgically look away from it, even find solutions to it in the past. It can also be the case that any sort of modern contemporary problem, doesn't have to be environmental, gets us wanting to look back to a future time. So this is the scene we saw before. It's Asher Brown Durand's Pastoral Landscape, appropriate title. So this is painted in 1861 on the eve of the Civil War, and it's trying to present a wonderful, beautiful, perfect view of the American rural experience, especially in the South. But this is just a crazy, nostalgic, over-the-top, defeatist way of approaching it, when in fact in scenes in landscapes just like this one, human beings were forced into slavery, and the bucolic way of representing this is sort of turning away from the turmoil and just imagining this rural perfect happy time when it's anything but. I mean, it's not just that slavery is there, it's always been there, but it's erupting in the psyche of all Americans as this issue. And instead of turning and facing it directly, you have people like Durand turning away from the problem, looking to find something simpler and better, and just sort of imagining that the real issues weren't existing at the time. Pastoral often works that way. So we want a nostalgic past, perhaps most, when the future is particularly bad. Not only just environmentally, but in this case, where culture, politics are going awry. Yeah, so something to think about is the perfect place in Christianity, Judeo-Christian tradition of Eden, and the Greco-Roman tradition of the Golden Age is temporal in a way, right? It goes back in time. That's the only way you can get to it. You can't get to it, so it's particularly frustrating. But with pastoral, it's spatial as well. It's not just in the past, but it's in a distant countryside, some place that you could go visit and a place that you could get to. In a way, it's utopian, right? It's the idea of imagining this better place where everything is okay, some place that you could hopefully even go visit. In that sense, it can actually be sort of a break with reality. With Brown's painting, which we just saw, it's a desire just to get away from the turmoil of the world and all its problems. Imagine some sort of utopian perfect existence, and it can be sort of a break with reality for that reason. Let's think about it now from an environmental perspective of pastoral. First off, and Andy Goldsworthy makes this point, as we've seen in Rivers and Tides, is that pastoral, as imagined by Theocritus and Virgil and hundreds, maybe thousands of others, is not a perfect relationship with the planet. I mean, not literally. What happens, of course, we saw at the beginning of the course with the Epic of Gilgamesh, starting in northern Africa, human beings start a project, becomes the project of Western civilization, one of the major ones, which is to deforest the area as we move into it. happens in Africa, happens in the Mediterranean basin, happens through northern Europe and England, goes to North America, and then into South America and other places now as well. To keep that deforested, and we've talked about this, sheep are perfect because they keep, they will rip up nearly any plant that grows in a pasture. Once you cut all the trees down, trees would come back again. It's the way it happens. But sheep literally rip them up by their roots, and they're excellent at maintaining a deforested area. Think of having your yard and never have to worry about mowing your lawn again. If you have sheep, they keep everything down, and you don't have to do it. So they, in fact, are the workforce of the second wave project of deforestation, which is intent, of course, on a massive modification of the environment. So in that sense, this is anything but an ideal relationship with the planet, and so far it's already deeply involved in changing the environment. Yeah, so it's not, an environmental idea. But one of the things about it, though, think of what I just said, if you didn't have to mow your lawn or maintain your yard, if it were entirely taken care of by sheep, it does promote an idea that comes up again and again, pastoral, the Latin word otium, which means leisure. So the pastoral idea, and this will go back to the Golden Age and to the pre-lapsarian Eden too, right? What happened to Adam after the fall? He had to work and labor on the earth. Before that, there was no labor required. Well, there's no labor required in the locus comunis of pastoral either, because sheep do all the work. It just fits beautifully into this prelapsarian non-labor type of life, and imagines that that when we did have a perfect relationship with the planet, we didn't have to really do anything to maintain it. So if you have a lot of leisure time, and otherwise known as odium, and this is a cornerstone of pastoral literature as well as the Golden Age and Eden, well, then you have a lot of time on your hands, right? All that odium. So you can engage in the pastoral pastimes that Theocritus imagines early in the game of singing matches and wooing shepherdesses and all. That's what you do, because there's no work required. So how do you fill your days? Well, you do it with these sort of fun activities. It's interesting to note then that because the pastoral, one of the pastoral activities is these sort of lyric singing matches of making songs and singing them back and forth, which you see as early as Theocritus. Poets will love the pastoral form because they imagine themselves like shepherds. They are the singers. They are the ones producing the lyrics, but in this form, lyric poetry. So you will often you'll often read the pastoral poem depicting and talking about the singing of the shepherd, but in fact it's literally talking about the writing of the poet. They're both doing a project of lyric. Another important characteristic to note early about pastoral is this one, which is nice in a very succinct, pithy way, made by Henry David Thoreau. Pastoral is the view of the pasture from the living room window. In other words, pastoral is not generally written in literal pastures. What I mean by that is it is traditionally an urban form. The overwhelming majority of pastoral that is written in the West is written from the point of view of the city. Very rarely do people write in the countryside, write wonderful over-the-top commendations of how wonderful that life is. Does happen. Romantic poets like John Clare are an example, but for the most part it is an urban form. As Thoreau says, it's seeing the pasture from inside the house, seeing it from inside the city. And as a consequence, now that you have this binary structure reappearing again, the city and the country, now that the city is seen as being the dismal, unappealing place, from that perspective, from the urban perspective, the pastoral, the rural, is going to be imagined as something very special. So from this dynamic, we have to realize that pastoral is not an accurate representation of the countryside at all. It is in fact seen as a very idealized place from the position of the city. and as a consequence, do not think that pastoral in any way literally represents what country life is like. It generally does not. Yeah. People will be aware of this, by the way. We're going to see people drawing attention to, people like Horace drawing attention to the fact that it's not the case. But so often, with all the hustle and bustle of our modern urban lives, and today that would probably include suburban as well, it's just so wonderful to imagine a perfect life in the country where you have nothing to do but, lie against a tree and sing a song while you watched your sheep. Yeah, that's not the way it is. Yeah. So one thing to think about, and I alluded to this before, is we saw in Brown's painting a rejection or a turning away from all the problems, the political, horrific problems that brought about the Civil War, to imagining a nicer place. It is also the case, and this is especially important for this course, that actual environmental problems can make you want to imagine a pastoral place free of those problems. So if we're releasing all sorts of biocides, herbicides and pesticides into the environment, then we might want to imagine a place where that isn't happening, where everything is nice and beautiful. So in that sense, and that is in fact was largely a big part of the experience of the 20th century, where environmental writers increasingly, being horrified by the contemporary state of the environment, imagine places free of all that. That was a very pastoral move on their part. We will read, of course, and you may have already read Silent Spring. I would direct you to the very first chapter, A Tale for the Future, 3 short pages. How does she start? She starts in an incredibly pastoral way by imagining an idyllic rural countryside. Why does she do that? It's a clever move on Carson's part. She's a very good writer, a very savvy, smart person. She knows that we come from this pastoral tradition. We're so used to it. We might believe that something like that can actually exist because we keep hearing about Eden, the golden age, in these pastoral places. So she wants us to imagine it, and she wants to imagine it as being threatened by something. Something could destroy this. And what is it? Well, it's biocides like DDT and all. We'll talk about this more in detail with her, but it is interesting how environmental problems can cause us to imagine a place free of those problems, and pastoral literature, which has been around for thousands of years, has really fit the bill for a lot of people in the 20th century. But keep in mind, as in the case of Brown's painting that we saw, that this can often be, maybe usually is, running away from the problems themselves. So environmental consciousness, important to talk about in this context. If someone like Carson draws attention, as she does in that first chapter of Silent Spring, to a countryside and to the dangers threatening it, the writer may well have developed an environmental consciousness and would like to pass it on to the reader. What do I mean by that? So if you lived in a perfect world where there are no environmental problems, and so you've actually lived in a real locus coeminus, paradoxically, you probably wouldn't know what the environment was, or why it was important in a certain kind of way, because it wouldn't be threatened. But if it's threatened and it's about ready to be destroyed, then suddenly you would become aware of it. You'd become aware of it as important and all, because its destruction was imminent. We would call that, we'll talk about this more, an environmental consciousness. If a writer develops that, they may then anyone could develop that. If you lived on a beautiful farm, the way Virgil imagines Melibœus in his first eclogue, then you could develop a consciousness of it. Then you could go one step further, which in fact Virgil does, and then write about it in the hopes of sharing that with other people, having them develop an environmental consciousness as well. So another observation comes out of our friend, the sometimes Nazi Martin Heidegger, that we're not always aware of the environment that we were born into in which we find ourselves. We often pay little attention to it. This, by the way, is not just an observation regarding the environment. This is the way sort of human beings operate. So you may have a friend in a friendship that you take for granted because it's always there and it's just so ubiquitous that it's part of your life and you never realize it. But then if that person were to somehow, for reason, leave and pull away from your life, suddenly everything that you had would come in relief because it was no longer there again. Heidegger wants to draw attention to how that works, and culturally this can be important too, because talk about something like misogyny or patriarchy, because it's so ubiquitous and it's in our lives all the time, we may not be aware of it unless something draws our attention to it, and this has been the feminist project of the last 50 years and more, in which case suddenly we say, oh, wait, okay, now I know, now I see this for the first time. It's like that friendship that you see for the first time. Something had to make you aware of it, and pull it out of the sort of the backdrop of our lives. Heidegger, his first big book, Being in Time, is a protracted reflection on this and a lot of other things. Yeah, so think of this now not as a friendship with the environment itself. You grow up on a farm, everything seems fine, then suddenly it starts changing dramatically. Rachel Carson, writing in 1962, said that, in like 15 years this is what had happened. Suddenly, everything that was nice and beautiful is different now. All the animals and birds are dying. Poignantly, that's the title. It's a silent spring because all the birds are dead, and suddenly something is threatening it. You become aware of it in a way that you wouldn't have before when everything was perfect, because now, like that friendship that's taken away, it's suddenly pulled into relief. From where I come from, Santa Barbara, there was a major oil spill in 1969. It was the largest spill in U.S. history up until that point. Before that, people in Santa Barbara were, of course, aware of their beaches. They went there all the time and all. But suddenly, when they saw them covered with oil and birds covered with oil, they became aware of them in a way that they hadn't before. Their value came to them in a way that hadn't before. And this is one of many events in the 1960s and 70s that brought about a large-scale environmental consciousness in the United States as people became aware of the environment, which they lived in the middle of before. We all are always in the middle of an environment. But when it became endangered, suddenly people saw it in a different way because of that. They appreciated it more. They developed environmental consciousness. Yeah. So artists and writers can also develop an environmental consciousness in that way. If you lived on in Santa Barbara near the beaches and you saw them covered with oil, you too would have developed an environmental consciousness. That's what happened to Rachel Carson. She's a journalist and a researcher. She began researching biocides, what are sometimes called pesticides, and she realized that there's a major problem here, and she saw clearly, as clearly as someone who saw oil on the beach, that something was very, very wrong here. In that sense, she developed an environmental consciousness. The challenge then for someone like Carson is to facilitate the emergence of the environmental consciousness in the reader. So to do that, how do you do that? Well, if you're an artist, one way to do it would be to gesture to an environment, either a pristine one being threatened or the environment already damaged by human beings, or both. So, you could take pictures, for example, of the oil-covered coast and share those with people. That would be a gesture. You're directing their gaze toward an environment that's already damaged. You could also do it by taking a picture of a beautiful landscape. Pastoral literature, pastoral art more generally, has always done this, right? It presents you with a photograph of something beautiful. Think of John Muir's photography, and that suddenly pulls that environment into relief for you. So you could either do one or the other, either a pristine, wonderful landscape traditionally what's pastoral has done, or one threatened, and in fact perhaps one already damaged. So think of Brown's painting again, written on the eve of the Civil War. Brown could have, drawn attention to what was going on in the political scene in the United States, but instead he looked away from it. So it is traditionally the case that people in this city have generally drawn attention to the pristine countryside, in contrast to the environmental problems brought about by urban life. So you don't get that many traditional depictions of urban problems, or environmental problems, even though they've been occurring for as long as we've had cities. The knee-jerk response is to just wistfully imagine a perfect place free of all that. Yeah, you may not even be aware, the artists may not even be aware that they were doing that, because they themselves are human beings. They themselves don't want to be confronted with the horrors of modern life, so they just sort of wistfully imagine someplace prettier and nicer than all that. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic here to think about, because if you are aware of this dyad between the country and the city, if you're looking at the countryside, it's often because you get a glimpse of your own environment. What I mean by that is you see all the problems with urban life and all, and you turn away from it to look at the countryside. But when looking at that perfect countryside and seeing all its features and how wonderful and how nice it is, it may occur to you, and you may actually turn around and get a glimpse of your own environment, and you may see it while looking at the perfect scene. In other words, you see a scene where life is nice and there's no violence, there's no fighting, everyone sings and gets along, and while looking at that, you suddenly comes into your mind that the world you live in isn't anything like that on any of those registers, that there's lots of problems and violence in it. Yeah, so remembering that pastoral is traditionally an urban art form, written in cities, in which case the countryside is being idealized. If you just studied pastoral art, and there's thousands of years of it to do that, literature, poetry, music, if you looked at that, you might think, wow, that's when life used to be much nicer than it is. Yes, when Sappho was writing, that's when things were really great, and now we live in a much more modern time where there's so many problems and all. Ironically, however, it's at those times it was still bad. In the 7th century before the Christian era, that's what provoked the writing of pastoral to begin with. Read Hesiod. When Hesiod writes about the Golden Age, move a few lines forward where he's talking about the Iron Age, and he says, but now everything is bad and horrible, and people lie and they cheat and steal. They're disrespectful to their parents. Everything is wrong. Well, we might think if we keep looking at all this pastoral art, that everything was great either 200 or 2,000 years ago, but the fact is it wasn't. And in fact, ironically, it's because things weren't great that the pastoral art itself may have come into existence to begin with. Yeah, so this is ironic, right? Because pastoral artists, drawing attention to pristine environments, are often doing so because of the striking contrast to their own contemporary environment. It is the case, however, and we're going to see this directly with Edward Burtynsky, which is one of the reasons we watched his film, the film about him, that an artist can draw attention directly to an endangered environment. So this is, again, not casting your gaze out from the city at a perfect country scene, but turning and facing the problems of the environment directly. You could call that anti-pastoral, right? So if pastoral is idealizing the countryside from the vantage point of the city, it's the case that, you'd see that as anti-pastoral, but it's somewhat misleading, as these works often function like traditional art as they draw attention to both pristine and endangered landscapes. So you might think that what Edward Burtynsky is doing is just drawing attention to damaged landscapes, to landscapes that are threatened environmentally. It's not the case. At the same time, he is doing what is not so much an anti-pastoral, but a traditional pastoral project of drawing attention to the pristine and the endangered landscape at the same time. So let's jump right into Edward Burtynsky, and he of course is the subject of the film Manufactured Landscapes, which, as you know, was radically different than the film Rivers and Tides about artist Andy Goldsworthy. So if you look at one of Burtynsky's landscapes, and again they are landscapes, but they seem, this one may seem to be entirely alien. I mean, if you look at it, especially that red color, it looks like it's from Mars or something. But his project is not to give you things that are that alien. In fact, it's to give you something that's sort of the converse of something familiar, and that would be this scene. He wants to remind us of something we've seen already. And in fact, he's gesturing towards something. So if you go back to, sorry. Well, notice here how the river gives life to its surroundings, right? This is a typical southwestern scene, I would think, where a river goes through an area. Notice all around it here, it's alive, made by the river. Back here, not nearly as bright, not nearly as green. The problem is that, the river has to be there to give life to things, otherwise, everything would be dry and faded. In this scene, note that there's no life anywhere. And this is why Burtynsky is such a great artist, he photographs this in the wintertime where the trees here are dead too, and it's meant to be evocative of the other scene and make you realize that, something very, very bad is happening here. Again, he could have just drawn attention to that perfect, pristine scene. You might have looked at that if it were, as a pastoral work and said, that's what beautiful country life is like. Here he is turning and making you confront what happens, what can be just the opposite of that. Yeah, even the trees seem dead. What Burtynsky is doing, and he does it in a very poignant way. You can call it anti-pastoral, but really both he and traditional pastoral art, which is literally describing a pastoral scene or writing about or picturing it, in both cases they want to draw attention to the endangered and pristine landscapes. That's what's happening. So traditionally you have someone like John Muir photographing the countryside, drawing attention to it, how beautiful it is. By contrast, the urban place where you live, you would have seen it for what it was. Burtynsky, on the other hand, he draws attention to an endangered landscape right from the beginning. That's what he wants to do. He turns his camera, sort of 180 degrees of what pastoral artists have originally done. That's why we could call it anti-pastoral. But what he wants to do is to gesture to something. He wants you to become aware of a problem. That process he is trying to do, of course, is what Rachel Carson was doing. He wants to develop an environmental consciousness in you. So traditionally, of course, even though from the time of the myth of Gilgamesh and before, cities have been a problem, he should, of course, rails against them. It is the case that increasingly in the past few hundred years, John Muir would be an example, I keep saying John Muir, I meant to say photographs, Ansel Adams, sorry. Ansel Adams would be a great example of trying to draw attention to the perfect landscape. But increasingly, the project has moved that the threatened landscapes, and Burtynsky is just the latest and one of the most vivid examples of this, are now being given precedence. That's sort of what the project is increasingly about. And it's important because when you look at this, again, you can just see this as sort of an alien, completely different landscape. But it avoids the dangers that pristine landscapes will be mistakenly seen as the actual subject of the pastoral work. So what do I mean by that? If you have a picture, get it right this time, by Ansel Adams, a photograph, you might just think that that's what it's about, that that's all that's involved, that's all that he cares about is, and I don't want to get specifically into Ansel Adams' biography, but you could say that's all he cares about is the natural scene. But why then does this become so important when it does? It's because, at that time in the United States, environmental issues were increasingly, human beings were increasingly dramatically changing the environment in a big way. You may not realize that, though, looking at Ansel Adams' photograph. You may just see it and say, well, this is just a beautiful photograph and nothing more. You may, if it's a painting from 500 years ago or a poem from 2,700 years ago, you may say, well, this is actually what the environment looked like at that time, and not realize that it's also at the moment of its creation written as because it meant to draw attention to environmental problems, and even having two shepherds out in the perfect landscape will draw attention to your own life. It's in the city and not being so nice. But here, this new project, this sort of flipping it around, 180-degree version that someone like Burtynsky brings to the scene, make sure that you don't do that. He gives you this at the very beginning, and make sure that this is what you see, even though it's invocative of this. That's the idea, right? It's meant to look like hills, and it's meant to evoke this. But make no mistake, we're going to be talking about the endangered landscape here and not this one, even though if you see a perfect landscape like this and you see a wonderful picture like this from the vantage point of the dismal city, it's still going to draw attention to the city. Yeah. So again, if pastoral has traditionally always been written from the urban scene, you might think that it is just about the countryside, but because it's written from the urban scene, it's that too. It's the artist looking away toward another environment, but in the sense turning around and capturing themselves at the same moment, gesturing toward another environment, an urban or endangered one. Yeah. So it's kind of confusing because think of a way of restating this. It's looking at a pristine environment, but in the process catching sight of your own, drawing attention to a pristine environment with the project of drawing attention to one that's not so pristine. Yeah. So in this sense, because Burtynsky gives precedence to the urban endangered landscapes, it makes it easier for us to understand the project. Watch manufactured landscapes and you will be shocked by environmental devastation. That's what he wants you to do. On the other hand, traditional pastoral, because imagine this perfect scene, you should have maybe at some point, if you woke up to the reality of life, realized that your life was nothing like this. You should have thought, well, they have everything so great there, but let me turn around and look at my life. Let's look at the material existence that I live, and then you may have had a picture similar to what Burtynsky does. Many of Burtynsky's images are meant as gestures. They meant to gesture. They give us an image of environmental devastation, but they gesture back to something else, a pristine image. Again, just the opposite. So traditional pastoral gives us pristine image, but in the process we may catch sight of devastation or at least problems with contemporary life. So saw this. This is the area where they're cutting apart these ships. Why is this such a poignant picture? In many ways, but in part because it is an ocean scene. This is we're so used to scenes like this and how beautiful and idyllic they are, but this is near where I live in Santa Barbara, by the way. But it's not anything like that, and we're just sort of horrified by the fact that this is what the ocean has now become. It's no longer just something of aesthetic beauty, but it's the place where all this trafficking in materials happen, and ultimately where these ships are destroyed. So again, wonderful, wonderful scenes, pictures by Burtynsky. And why is this so important? It's not just that it's like a Martian landscape, but it's meant to evoke a typical mountain scene like that. So again, it gestures toward one, but is only intelligible because we see, in looking at it, we catch sight of this at the same moment. Some of his early work, as you recall from the film, in the United States, in the large quarries. Why is this so striking to us? Because it is evocative of a valley. It's meant to have you do just what I'm doing here. See this, but then see this in your mind's eye. Pastoral traditionally would have given you the scene, but seeing it, you would have recalled the reality of your life, which is something more like this. So that's the end of the first part of Pastoral. We're going to pick it up in lecture 7, specifically with Virgil. But it's just something to leave you with a few things to remember. That one, it is like Eden in the Golden Age because it is evocative of a perfect time. 2, pastoral is not just in the past, but the perfect pastoral place can be someplace out in the landscape. Although with pastoral literature we have to be clear whether it's literal or allegorical what's being talked about. But when it is literal, the question is the subject really this perfect pastoral place? Does such a place really exist? Or is this a commentary on the realities of largely urban life at the time? Edward Burtynsky draws attention to the problems of at least industrialized life so that we can, and in the process evoke something nicer that we once had. Okay, well that's it. Thanks a lot. And lecture 7 next time.